What's up, Shred Sexuals? Welcome back. Death of the Fingers. We're going to get into some really essential good recording techniques I've learned this year that are absolutely crucial for anybody to be successful here. These things made massive differences. I've talked about some of the plugins and stuff like that that have made a pretty big difference, but I want to talk about some of the ideas behind using those plugins to really take your music production skills to the next level without actually being like Joe production expert. This stuff is pretty straightforward, but it's common sense. But the difference it makes, because it gives you a certain measure of control, is just ridiculous. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is chains of plugins, okay? I'm going to talk about the guitar here. First off, you can see I start off here with just this light compression. And the thing here is this is a pensado principle. So instead of just having it through this one plugin, then I had it with compression that also has this section in the middle, which is a Pultec basically. I was like, break it up into two. So I do a tiny bit. I'm basically just running through this thing. I'm barely doing anything to it, right? Except for turning down the output volume before going into this next stage of compression. You guessed it, right? And from there, I do some EQing, but instead of actually using like a standard sort of surgical EQ, I'm using this spectral compression now. This cleans up your sound, but doesn't actually rob you of the power and the fat girthiness of the instrument, which some EQing stuff can do. Sometimes it needs to get done because there's just problem frequencies there. There's nothing you can do. But for me personally, I'm doing a lot of pre-production stuff in the Helix to get rid of that stuff in the guitar sound, so I don't need it. I just need to just get rid of some low end stuff. And here's another one. Obviously there's 4 points here. There are always going to be 4 points. One in the low end, one in the low mids, one in the upper mids, and then one in the upper end. That is going to be a problem, right? And you can see way up here with the upper end, I've just got it like pinned. It's gone. The whole, like, you know, top end of this guitar frequency has just been removed. Right? So don't be afraid to get extreme, because I can add it back in. You see what I'm saying? It was fizzy and nasty sounding, so I just nuked it from Mars, and that gave me the opportunity. Again, I'm running that whole chain now into this one. This plugin is specific to guitars. So the EQ section is designed specifically to accentuate the EQ section for guitars. Same thing with this saturation module here they call drive. Same thing with the compressor. The compressor is designed specifically to, you know, make guitar sound great. This phase correction is huge, especially with rhythm guitar stuff when you're dealing with left-right channels. This is a game changer, this one. And of course, the ability to start to factor in some stereo delay to widen the guitars out a bit before you actually even do any stereo widening. It makes it sound fuller. Of course, this interesting EQ here, I don't really know how to explain it, but you can go in surgically. Usually I find with the guitar and the bass, you can only have one band here, but there's one region in here that's going to be exceptionally problematic, and you can just get rid of it totally. And I'm using this really weird sort of whatever EQ curve, so I don't I don't know what they call that one. But it works great. So that's the whole chain, right? You see me going from the initial light focusing and compression into the actual full body compression, into some sort of sonic profiling, right, where I'm getting rid of some certain problematic frequencies. Then I build it back up again using saturation and compression, right, using equalization and the phase correction. And last but not least, it's going to go and feed all the way up to what I call the master track. In this case, there's my rhythm guitar right there. And I've got the SSL on here. Okay, so this whole sequence of plugins took me like 3 years to finalize. Okay, this one's been on here for like 2 years. You know what I mean? But some of the other ones, like the spectral compression, that didn't happen until like about 6 months ago or whatever. Not even like that. It's like a month ago, 2 months ago. I don't know. Right? So that's what I'm getting at, is just like you have to find the sequence that works for you. And honestly, this plugin in the future is going to be down here. and this plugin is going to be up there. And they're going to be swapping positions, but for now I'm just leaving it as is because the template's set up this way. But eventually this is going to be on this channel here, where I have all the control down there, and then this is just going to be the final one at the top here. But the point here is that from here now, this leads to the second one that's really, really useful with respect to recording technology, is the idea of parallel processing and parallel compression. From here, I'm sending this track down to these other tracks. Now listen, this here highlighted section, let me scroll down a bit. This highlighted section is the parallel processing for the rhythm guitars. So the two pink ones here, those are stereo widening, but it's for each set of rhythm guitars individually. So mine and then Pierre's, right? But these next three here, like this is actual parallel processing for the two rhythm guitars. There's like this semi-distorted guitar, you know, what I call the half distortion, and the bass guitar. So I'm treating them all as the same sort of element, piping them all in. And that's why I have this channel down here, which I call send sum. And I have two of them. One of them is a control track that comes down on tracks 3 and 4. Okay, the reason is because I'm using parallel compression, meaning I'm using that to feed this plugin here. This is Fuser again from Mastering the Mix. It's the same company that does Rezo, but this one's specific for parallel compression, and it does the same thing. It does the same kind of spectral sort of compression, but now based around a control track. So this guitar track up here is 90% of my sound, but this stuff down here is the last 10%. But every time I start adding in one of these things, like say, for example, the top end, whoops, I was at the top end here. When I add this plugin on here, on top of the one that I'm already running here, okay, when I get to the end of this chain, and it's sounding pretty damn good, but I'm like, you know, if I'm already maxed out here, essentially with the top end, I need a bit more. And that's exactly what happened. So I was like, I need to throw on this this top end, but for just, you know, everything, the bass guitar, my guitar, Pierre's guitar, the half distorted guitar and all that, just an extra little bit of oomph, you know, just a little bit of drive, just a little bit of top end. It's going to sound nice. You know what I mean? And there are other things here too. Obviously, the mono maker is very useful. The headroom situation, this bass function here is insanely useful. Just going out there on a limb and telling you this is one of my favorite plugins for guitars and stuff like that. It's absolutely indispensable, but I digress. Once I add this into the mix, it's too much. And when it comes right down to it, there are 3 problem areas. But here's the thing. If I use Rezo, right, then I'm going to be filtering out frequencies that I don't want to frequency out or sort of, you know, screen out. So I have to use this parallel sort of system for compression, and that's why I'm using these control tracks down here, right here, right, sending all of that information here where I already have the balanced mix between the bass guitar, the 2 rhythm guitars, and the half distorted guitar. It's already a balanced mix. I'm adding this into the mix. So if I don't start to control for that variable here, by having that be the thing that controls it, I think you get the idea. You know what I mean? It's like 2 systems, but one can start running away. You can't. You have to have the supervisory system send that control information down to the secondary system, in this case here, right? And then, of course, to control how much of it goes in there, I have this sort of summing of the audio. So I only want this much volume from the main guitar channel for Pierre's rhythm guitars going into whatever this is, you know? And all of them together, it goes in all together at the same time. And then this one, I'm doing a bit more with mine. And the thing is like, at first I had them individually, and it was getting too complicated. It was easier to group them together. And then, of course, just start to manipulate the effect all as one thing, right? So I would turn this off and dial in this saturation, which makes the guitar sound fatter and punchier, right, and get it as good as I could sounding with just this. And then I'd come up here to the fuser, turn it on, and just and get rid of the last little bits that were just like killing it. So once I took these two off, and I was just like done. And of course, you can just drop a note on there and just hunt them down ruthlessly and do like 2 or 3 notes. You don't want to get too extreme here. Notice I'm not doing anything extreme. And it has other functions too with this mid-side tightening, the Q function, attack release. I mean, it's an incredibly useful plugin. I'm just going to say that. And this is a game changer. It'll turn your guitars from sounding like pretty damn good to being like, holy okay, so I'm telling you right now, this makes a difference, especially when you start treating everything as a group. I should stress that more. You'll notice here that it's a group. I'm doing a whole bunch of things. The bass guitar, the rhythm guitars, I'm basically ganging all of that sort of heavy stuff together to run through this. Nice, I'm choking to death. Run through this battery of effects, which again, this is a Pultec. Basically low end and mid range. That's what this is doing. It's enhancing the low end and the mid range. This one here, saturation, okay, plus top end sheen. Look at me, I'm just cranking the air. And this one here gives it like the shimmery sort of accents on the top end. It's just the crystally sort of juiciness. I don't know how to encapsulate that. Okay, so it's 3 different sort of like little flavors that I want to dial in various sort of amounts as necessary by instrument. I want this much of the bass guitar to run through this little sort of battery of sounds. And when I do that, I get this really killer sound. Now, obviously, when I was mixing them first, I was doing them all as one thing. But that's just it. You kind of want to dial everything in when these things are sitting at 0, like just in the 0 position when you fire up the plugin. Just dial in the sound. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Just dial in the sound here as necessary for each one, right? To be like, that sounds pretty good. It sounds balanced, right? And then, of course, you can start to manipulate the actual controls, and then you can finally, at the end, readjust the output volumes and stuff like that, or do any sort of compression and whatnot to clean it up. You see what I mean? You got to start off by just running it through there in the sort of the standard configuration, or make some slight EQ moves, or have like whatever, a preset that you like. This is what I like to start off with this particular plugin. And once you do that, of course, you can just dial it in. And of course, the 3 and 4 here, these ones, they're all at max volume and stuff like that. They just control, again, the parallel processing necessary to make this plugin work. Now, you can run it at the beginning, or you can run it at the end of the chain. I'm sure the company's like, you're not supposed to do it like this, but honestly, when I did it like this, it sounded better. So that's just my personal opinion, and that's how I'm using it, and that's the end of the story. So that one right there, I know I spent a little bit more time on that, is insanely useful. You could do the same thing for drum and bass guitar. You could gang like strings and keyboards together, acoustic guitars, keyboards. Like when you start thinking about grouping elements and then adding a little extra parallel processing to it, you're like, I need more saturation between the keyboards and the acoustic guitar to make them sound more rich and full. And then all of a sudden do this final step where you do the parallel sort of compression with removing out the problem frequencies. I guarantee you your mixes will go from amateur to pro, just like that. Boom. And those are all the steps you really need. You don't need any more extra fancy stuff or fancy hardware or anything like that. That'll come later if you get even better and you start getting paid gigs. But just for your own personal use, in terms of you being like, that sounds a million times better than it did before, this is basically all you really need. And again, notice the simplicity by aggregating the tracks together, both as control tracks and as the input volumes, to feed all of these in one place all I have to do, realistically speaking, is drop down this one feeder here, which lets me feed everything at once. So not only can I have the fader open like this, over here like this, and control everything, but then I can also, open up the sort of secondary fader here, the mini fader, and then mess with these controls as necessary when it's going into it. So if I start dialing in more widening, you're like, that sounds better, but it's too loud, then I can just, of course, come over here and turn down the fader volume, or do a combination of the fader volume and the output gain here, or input gain, or whatever it is. Right, so there it is. You know what I mean? That's absolutely killer idea. It took me years to figure that out. That's because I'm dork, basically, but that'll make your mixes sound amazing. Next, of course, is the idea that you can use automation to gain way higher levels of control over your mix. So in this case, again, you'll see me do this volume automation here on the guitars. Look, when I go from this one section here to this one, you notice that it's barely moving at all. You know what I mean? And the thing is like, if you were actually doing this with holding the fader and moving the mouse and stuff, you would never get it that precise. Okay, so the thing is I get the guitars at a relative level, then I adjust the sections as necessary in tiny increments using an automation. And of course, you can get there by either dropping it down like this. You'll see over here the output gain, but you can also see here me using the settings. This is another great one. On this side over here with the guitars, I've got it EQ'd here with this A section, but when I get to the end, I was like, that doesn't sound as good as with the instruments that I'm using at the end here. I had to change it over, so now I can move to the B section and re-EQ the guitars. So I get two different EQ and dynamic profiles, that are completely customizable by just adjusting the settings parameter, which is up here like this, and accessible here. Of course, you can just go to, in the envelope, you can go here to settings. Sometimes it's called bank. You know what I mean? You can select it here from this menu if you have Reaper and stuff like that. And of course, I'm using the output gain here because when you grab these things, you can adjust them in fine increments by holding down Control and Shift at the same time if you're a Reaper person. And that'll let you increment or decrease it by, like, I think it's 0.5%. That is insanely precise. So you can get like the slightest little volume increments when necessary to just bring the guitars up to be like, that's exactly where it needs to be to make it sit, everything sound right with the vocals. In certain instances where you see me put the guitars up louder here like this, it's because the vocals are a little bit louder. So I had to push the guitars to make it sound more even. You know what I mean? Done deal. So it was awesome. And the other one here is that after you kind of figure that out with the settings, you're like, okay, I can EQ it differently. I can get different kind of dynamic sort of profiles with compression and expansion and gating and all the rest of that. So very, very powerful tool that. And then, of course, the fine control, if you will, over top of these functions. And honestly, if you're doing it right, you'd have this one and the input gain together so that you could do the minuscule changes between them to get it absolutely mint. But that's only if you're a perfectionist. And then you can take it to an extreme. Since I'm sending all of these here to a bunch of other tracks, well, stands to reason that I can start to manipulate those send volumes, and that's exactly what I do here with this guitar track here, the solo. Again, you see me doing the settings trick down here over here on this part of the solo. I think it's over here. I'm using the A setting because I think it was the neck pickup, but when I did it over here, it was the bridge pickup, right? So there was a big sound difference, and I was just like, okay, job number one, swap it between A and B. This is for the bridge or the neck or whatever it was, and this is vice versa, right? But then the problem is that I'm sending this stuff down again to a series of parallel tracks. Now listen, they're all set to 0 here because I have these automations on the grid already. Okay, so it automatically sets it to 0 in the program because I've already got these points set, and you can see it's set to minus 47.2. Okay, but the thing is like when I had it in this configuration, which sounded great for this solo, it was like, yeah, that's mint. By the time I got over here, I was like, no, that is totally wrong. And this I did this morning. This thing I'm showing you, I actually did this morning. So I put these send automations in there. I'm like, it needs to be wider comparably to where it was before. So I widened it up, but I dropped down the delay, the sort of ping pong spiral delay. I also dropped down this long delay tail, but I pumped the reverb a little bit more. You see what I mean? Comparably to where it was. And by doing those simple sort of automation moves, it completely changed the characteristic of the solo. And it took me from being like sitting there for about 10 minutes trying to EQ it properly with just doing A-B to being like, there's the secret sauce. The combination of all three, controlling the send volumes, controlling the settings and the compression, the dynamics right here between A and B, right, was that. And of course, last but not least, is down here, me just actually doing sort of like the global controls essentially to keep the characteristic of the actual overall sound relatively the same. You can have small differences, but if there's massive differences between the guitar sounds, can be a little jarring and probably not desired. So down at this stage, you're looking for consistency of controlling the dynamics and the EQ and getting rid of problem frequencies and cleaning everything up, and it's nice and solid and stuff. And by the time you're getting up here, this is where you can start getting more creative by adding more of this sort of widening effect, if you will. I'm already changing the EQ profile, so it's going to sound different no matter what. So too much of a good thing, obviously bad thing. But this right here, automating the send volumes, automating so that you get different, the opportunity, of course, I should say, to change the EQ profile as necessary. Volume automations, that's this one here. The incremental automation you get with respect to the fader volume, this one is a huge one because it's so much more precise. I can move this line way more precisely than I can actually move this fader. That's just a fact. Okay, so that's why I've got this here. It was all a straight line like this before, but then of course I started to manipulate it. And then I'd go through each of the guitar lines to get it right. And of course, where necessary, I changed the profile and changed the volume envelopes. So there it is. But instead of doing like this standard volume envelope here, with respect to the actual track volume, I'm doing it proportional to the plugin itself, which of course is important because it's going to affect all these other channels. If all of a sudden you just start increasing this volume on the channel alone without increasing the other stuff proportional to it, you're going to run into a problem, right? So that's why it's proportional to the output gain, and I'm not just adjusting or decreasing the track volume. I went directly to everything is tied to this one particular fader, and of course also to the input gain here. But for the sake of purposes, and here's the thing, you could probably in Reaper tie these two functions together so that when you increase this volume, it decreases the input gain and vice versa. So you might be able to actually find a happy balance between the two and then make subtle sort of alterations by doing this and get even a better result. I'm actually thinking about maybe doing that tomorrow. That's a good idea. I'm going to look that up today. So again, you get to seeing how you start to get to even deeper sort of revelations once you get to this idea. I can, manipulate the output gain, but then, of course, doing them in tandem where they sort of move proportionally to each other, again, would be even more useful, right? Because you never know when you might be able to hit that really super sweet medium where the guitars just sound absolutely buttery and killer. But ultimately, having the control either in the finite with respect to the volume or with respect to when you're setting this volume with respect to the parallel tracks to you know, make sure that things like your solo sit really well in the mix, because nothing sucks more when your solo sort of sits like deadpan straight up the center. By adding in that stereo widening, the studio widening, nice. By adding the stereo widening was the thing that made all the difference. And since I was already doing the little sort of settings trick, it was no big deal, because all I had to do was turn the output volume down and the problem was solved. 2 seconds, right? So food for thought there. And that pretty much concludes the video. So just to recap, you've got the sort of plug-in chains, right? You're gonna have them. You can see me doing this insane plug-in chain here for just the drums. Now it's broken up into multiple tracks because I'm doing a special technique called brow rising, but ultimately same principle. In this case it's all done in parallel, and in this case it's all done in serial. Okay, so I'm doing one right into the next. And then, of course, even though this is on a separate track, it's feeding into it. So this might as well be in that chain. And of course, that one feeds all the way up into this one up here. So it might as well be in the chain. So there are 5 plugins in that chain. The first 3, then there's the one, the guitar strip, and then finally this. And from there, that leads to the next recording revelation, where you can send it down into parallel, where you're either controlling it using parallel compression. You can use spectral compression. You can use a standard compressor. You can do it with the Kirchhoff and stuff like that. Has compression elements on the EQ itself. There's a lot of choices there, and obviously there's a job for, or a tool for every job. So sometimes this is not going to be the tool for the job, and you're going to want to use the Kirchhoff and basically do the compression that way. Done deal, right? So keep that in mind. Constantly be experimenting. And there are other instances where you're just going to go full Monty and just basically create the entirety of the sound, because again, I was running into the issue of blooming. That's why this compressor was on here initially, was because every time I was doing the sort of like, you know, the parallel compression here, I noticed the effects would drop out and then they would come back and it would sound really, really strange. But then when I deleted the sidechain compression and just had it as a normal compressor, it sounded a million times better. So, you know, problem solved. And that was just one of those trial and error situations. And again, with the clean sort of bank here for the parallel compression, they're all individual tracks, because usually these clean tracks are all different sounds, right? I have 2 different sounds here for each of these clean sounds. So I want to be able to send them independently now to each one of these sort of effects, right? Each one to the stereo widening to depend, because maybe one I want wider than the other. You know what I mean? But I want to gang them all together. And in this case, I just want to filter out some problem frequencies with respect to this one plugin. You know what I mean? When you're talking about cleans, you have to be very careful about how much filtration you're getting into, because a lot of times that just hollows it out and it sounds terrible. Okay, but that's another video. But that's the difference. You can see there's 3 different stages. I'm doing one where it's all individual, right? Each one of these has all of the clean guitars going into it. Then I have one where it's going into it as just full on, right? There's no sort of extra EQing after the fact. And then I have one where there's parallel compression going into it, where I use a control track, because the rhythm guitars, the distorted ones, they can become so unruly that if you don't do this, you can't get that tight, modern sort of metal production where your guitars are big and fat and crushing and grooving, but, you know, not woofy and sort of, you know, flubby, out of shape, I guess you could say, like I have been for like the last 5 years. So there's the video. Make sure you start to toy around with them, right? Create a plug-in chain. And again, sort of have a plan in mind as to what it is exactly you're trying to accomplish here. In this case, when I was like, I already had 1 compressor here, I was like, break it up into 2 compressors and then find the 2 compressors that actually work the best together to accomplish that goal. And then be like, should I use an EQ here? Or should I use spectral compression? then be like, do I want to use something like Guitar Strip? Or do I want to go straight into the SSL? Or do I want to do something else? Maybe a preamp. I want to show you this. I'll leave it at this here. This is, I guess, the bonus tip with Pierre's rhythm guitars here. Or that's me again. That's because I'm an idiot. Sorry. I'm blind. I need glasses. I can see that now. With Pierre's guitar here, it sounded pretty damn good. But the problem is it didn't sound good enough, so I had to add this preamp. This is a great trick. At the end of something, you can add a plug-in like this, a preamp, and I have about 6 or 7 of these preamps, but this one is my favorite to use for right now. To warm it up and knock off some of the rough edges and tighten it up in a lot of mechanics. This one's got this really killer sort of compression section that just, with these 2 knobs here, the compression, the travel knob, and the level and mix knobs with the makeup gain, this whole section right here is phenomenally useful for basically warming up any sort of like digital sounds. And this thing is just a beast for that. And of course, it gives you the extra added love here of this little tiny EQ section where you can just dial it in that much more. Boom. I'm telling you, it sounds fantastic. But you can use any type of preamp for this, and it works fantastic. So if you're finding that whatever you ran through here, you're like, it sounds good, I really like it, but it sounds cold or anemic or a little too sort of, you know, brittle or something, that's preamp territory. Throw that on, just dial it in. Notice I'm only using a bit of it here, almost 80%. I've way reduced the input volume, and I've cranked the makeup to make this work harder, right? So there it is. You know what I mean? A great extra little tip, and these types of thing with the plug-in chains and stuff, and you start to learn, oh yeah, that's what you use a preamp for. It's not just for running your mic through it. That's what they would do in the old days. They'd take the austere signal of a mic and warm it up with saturation and some EQ and stuff like that through a preamp. They're just doing it in reverse. Since I recorded all this stuff using a digital medium, in certain instances I need to warm it up again like leftover dinner in the microwave. And I'm doing that with this preamp. This is a relatively new concept. I was like, should I? And I did it just on a whim. And man, does this ever work good. So if you can find a good preamp too, this Neold brand is great, but there are lots of them. Track a couple down. And like I said, there's a whole bunch of them. And there's different types too. So you might want to target in when you see someone be like, oh, here's a cool preamp from the 50s. That's another good one to sort of jump into. Like I have this one here. Let's see. It's under Plugin Alliance, and it'll be over here. This one here, I think it's this guy. Yeah, is another version of it. This one's from the 50s. Super simple. It's just an analog preamp. Okay, now it's got 3 stages here, but it does exactly the same as this one. This one works amazing on guitar. This one works amazing on acoustic guitars, vocals, piano, and stuff like that. Like it just, you take a digital piano sound that you're getting from a VST instrument, and then you run it through something like this, and it'll make it sound so much more realistic. You'll be like, it's night and day. Okay, so that's a great tip. Of course, the automation tips, whether you're using it, to control the send volumes, whether you're using it to control the settings, or using it to use a much more finite level of control over things like volume, which is going to be obviously the number one consideration when you're talking about up here. Notice how I've dialed it into like the nth degree now. It went from being pretty loose and fast down here to being like supremely controlled with anal retentive precision, right? Like I've carved out every single little region where it's necessary, and even got to, extremes in certain areas like here where I was like, it needs this extra little bit of love. And that's what it takes to basically make it all work kind of situation. And it's a combination of all of that stuff that'll make your mixes sound amazing rather than just, slap a plug-in on there. You know what I mean? Again, you can see me doing The SSL here now for the death metal vocals, the extreme metal vocals, warming it up again. And on top of that, now I'm using this weird sort of detuning echo to add more body to the like a cavernous kind of like deathy feel to the vocals. I just wanted to try out this plugin. It's awesome. The end. So you know what I mean? It is what it is. And I got to play around with it more kind of situation. I didn't actually sort of pay attention down here to the dynamics filter. Plus it's got a whole bunch of other functionality and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Like you can start to do other things with it. But that's another day kind of situation, right? So, oh, I think, yeah, oops, I keep messing with it. I shouldn't be doing that. There it is. I think that's what I had before. But yeah, it's pretty cool. You can kind of start to mess around with the way it works, and then how each piece moves in relation to it with the processing and all the rest of that stuff. And I'm just not going to save this, so it's okay. But you get the idea here. These plugins are incredibly useful and powerful. The only downside is this settings here, you'll notice, is not actually something that you can select. You can bypass. You can do everything else, but you cannot select the sort of extras there. You know what I mean? It doesn't show up anywhere here as a selectable control, which in my opinion hurts it comparably to something like Plugin Alliance, which does allow that and does a fully licensed version. I can't tell you if the other one is better than this one because I haven't used it enough. I just started messing with it, so I have to mess with it some more. After 6 months, it'll probably be better. But even if it was better, the fact that you have 4 different options here still, in my opinion, makes this the more competitive plugin. And I'm just going to say that this functionality here with the settings is ridiculously useful, and I've used it in many different capacities, with saturation, with EQ here, with everything, different types of plugins. Some of them you can't do it, and when that happens, I just slap a plugin on it that does. And that's all there is to that. Okay, so again, I can't stress this enough. This little functionality here has been one of those game-changing moments, and so I would highly recommend that you can do it. But obviously, the Plugin Alliance one and this one from SSL, they basically do essentially the same function. And this one sounds killer too. Trust me, don't get me wrong. This sounds absolutely killer. So it works great. It's just death metal vocals are pretty tricky to play with. So there it is. Done deal. All right. So, that's the video. I hope that the tips help out, and you know, just start experimenting with these chains. Start experimenting with some automation. Start experimenting with the idea of you know, controlling the send volumes to your parallel processing. Start factoring in some parallel processing. Be like, I want to add some saturation to my rhythm guitars. It starts with one line of parallel processing, and then you start to build it up to be like, I think I want to now control that using parallel compression or parallel sort of spectral compression or some other form of parallel something. You know what I mean? You choose where you're using a control track. Essentially, that's the difference, right? And then try to set yourself up so it makes sense. There's my control track being fed into all of this stuff, and here's all the volumes being set in, so I can now just activate everything right from here rather than have to go down here and select everything from here. You know, obviously that doesn't make as much sense unless I'm down here and then I want to do it in vice versa. I don't have to go to each one selectively, but when I'm working on the bass guitar and I'm starting to do my initial mix, I have that control right away to be like, okay, I'm just going to dial in some of this right now to get the overall mix working, and then I can go in and tweak these parameters as necessary, whether it's through this parallel processing or right here on the actual plugin. You see what I mean? You might have to make a click one way or the other, and it goes from being like pretty good to being like, there it is. Or you take this and you move it over half a dB or whatever it is, and it's like, oh, okay, there it is. You know what I mean? Like, that's usually all it takes. And so it makes your life in terms of mixing so much easier, because eventually this is saved as a template and you're just basically get used to manipulating this all the time. And of course, you just drop them on there whenever necessary, or you have a new instrument configuration. So done deal, mint. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. I wish you all the best in your recording journey. I hope that these tips help out significantly, and just start experimenting with these ideas. Don't be afraid. Everybody starts off at 0, eventually become a hero 2, and then finally keep your nose to the grindstone. Your mixes will get better. Your music will sound better. More people will be like, that sounds awesome. And you'll achieve your goal. And that's the most important thing. Just don't give up. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you in the next one.